Hi, everybody. It's Doug Green, and I'm the publisher of Technology Reseller News. And I'm very pleased to have with us today Brett Nemeroff, who's the Vice President of Engineering for Voice at Numeracle. Brett, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Doug. It's good to be here.
Well, this is really great. We're going to be actually talking about a topic, about a term that actually isn't quite new, but I think everyone needs to learn about it, know about it, and how it is important now. So we're going to be learning about RCD. What is it? And can you trust it? And now, before we dive into that, Brett, just briefly, what is Numeracle?
So Numeracle is an industry pioneer and leader with actionable solutions for legal callers that prioritizes their calling identity as the foundation to restoring trust in the voice channel and to their calls by removing barriers like improper spam labels from harming their phone calls. One big thing that we do is we evangelize technology that helps introduce verifiable identity into telephone calls. And ultimately, Doug, what we're trying to do is we're trying to help restore trust into communications.
Well, that's what we're always talking about with you guys. That's the big picture for Numerical. And so now let's break it into one of the big pieces, and that's RCD. What is RCD?
So RCD it stands for rich call data. And really, it's no more than a new way of transmitting additional caller metadata, such as name, reason for calling, and a logo to the end user. And the reality is having a new way to transmit that metadata, in of itself, it's not that exciting. However, RCD allows the data to be embedded inside of a shaken passport, which means that it's signed by the originating carrier that is expected to be performing KYC on the customer. Because of this, it's possible to send cryptographically verifiable end-to-end caller information, which really has never been possible before.
So is it being used today? Because this is not new, right? This came up a few years ago.
Yeah, it's not new. It came out back in 2017, and the standard has been kind of kicked around for a while. We're very, very close to actually getting it finalized, but people are already starting to use it. Now, there's a handful of platforms already today that internally support RCD, but there's very few implementations in the wild that utilize RCD to transmit really usable data between those networks. The real reason for that is mostly because of a lack of a coordinated policy on methods and procedures. As an industry, we haven't really agreed on how to do things, not so much on the technical side, because the standard is actually quite good for how we transmit RCD, but really more so on the KYC side. Because of that causes a lack of trust. And if we don't trust the data, why would we use the data? So the reality is with where the RCD spec is today, somebody could send you RCD today, but you don't know who they are necessarily. If you're the terminating carrier, the originating carrier is the entity that actually put the RCD together. You may not have any idea who that carrier is. And so if you don't know who they are, you don't necessarily trust the data that's in there, why would you ever give it to your customer? Now, today, one really important implementation of RCD that's out there is one that's being coordinated by the CTIA in their new branded calling ID system that they're putting together. Numeracle has been a big part of rolling out this new technology, and this very specifically does use RCD inside of Shaken.
So, and since all the problems you guys deal with are really not just domestic, but of course global, is this something that can be delivered globally?
Yeah, it absolutely could, but RCD in of itself is, like I said, just a method to transmit data in a cryptographically verifiable manner. The biggest issue that we have globally is a lack of established circles of trust. Just because someone sends you RCD doesn't mean that you'll instantly trust it and send it on to your customer. But really, for RCD to become effective, we need to standardize on a few things, such as methods and procedures for doing KYC, enforcement methodologies. If people do things that they're not supposed to do, what do we do to stop them from doing that? And then inter-carrier and inter-country trust relationships. The way we do things here might not necessarily be the same way that we do things in other countries. It's interesting to note, and I like to point this out a lot, that we had similar struggles with web browsers years ago, before the days of SSL and HTTPS that had to be solved. We had to decide on things like who are the entities that are allowed to hand out certificates and in which countries. Who do we trust? What do we do when we have something, when one of these entities does something untrustworthy? And how do we, most importantly, clearly show end users who really are not engineers what they can and they can't trust? All of these issues had to be solved with web browsers. For example, right now, you may go to the Amazon site and put in your credit card information. You probably, at this point, you don't think twice about whether or not you're really talking to Amazon or a man in the middle. So really what we're trying to do is we're trying to take telecom and kind of bring it up to the same kind of standards that we've been doing for well over 20 years in web browsers. The important thing to note, though, is because RCD is largely dependent upon passports, that means that it's tied to certificates. And because it's tied to certificates, you'll be able to point the finger at who is putting that RCD on the call. So RCD, the way that it's been designed, does provide mechanisms that we can build all of this, where we can do enforcement, but it does require coordinated policies. Just because you receive that RCD doesn't mean it came from someone that you trusted.
Now, you mentioned enforcement. Who's the enforcer?
Right. So this is definitely something that has to be figured out in order for people to start trusting RCD and data. Right now, because there aren't any RCD implementations that work between networks, or if there are RCD implementations between networks, they're between private networks, and the enforcement is handled privately between those networks. Once we get into using RCD in the wild, it's really going to become dependent on having some sort of centralized start of authority. You can look at it similarly to the way PKIs work. It's the same way, for example, that we see in web browsers where there's the certificate authorities. There's going to have to be some sort of circle of trust that's established. So if you kind of think about it this way, if someone sends you an RCD, now keep in mind the way that RCD is formatted, it's inside of a passport and that's signed. And so to have a passport signed, you have to have a certificate. And where does that certificate come from? That is the big issue about how we create circles of trust. Okay. Once we create that circle of trust, once we have a PKI, then we have an entity that we can say, hey, I received this RCD. It has invalid information in it. Where did this come from? And that passport with the RCD in it, because it's got a certificate to the originator who built the RCD and put it onto the network, you'll know exactly where to point the finger and where to perform that enforcement. So there is not an enforcement functionality that exists today. However, for RCD to exist in the wild, it's going to require us to build these circles of trust. And through the establishment of a circle of trust, we'll be able to point the finger all the way at the other side of the network to say, are you doing it the right way? And are you giving me valid information? And that's something today, especially when you take a look at technologies like CNAM, we just can't do.
So, Brett, as we wrap up our podcast today, let's bring it right back to the beginning. Does all this, is this a road to restoring trust?
Yeah, ultimately, that's what we're trying to do here. Ultimately, people are looking at their phones when they ring and they're rolling their eyes. They don't want to answer the phone. And we're trying to come up with mechanisms to deliver the calls that people want to be receiving and to give them the information that they can trust when their phone rings, to know that they can answer.
So, Brett, as we wrap up our podcast today, let's come full circle, because we're beginning and ending with this idea of, I don't know if I can really trust my phone anymore. Everything that comes in there is just spam.
Yeah, and that is fundamentally the problem that we're trying to solve here, is that people have lost trust in communications. And they look at their phone when it rings right now, and they don't know if the brand that's being displayed on their phone is really the brand that's calling them, a call that they want to answer, or something that they can trust. I can't tell you how many times even I've been told by doctors' offices, you need to answer the phone even if it says spam likely. And because of this, people they don't like to use the phone anymore, because they just don't know if they can trust it anymore. So we're trying to come up with new mechanisms to solve those problems. And the best way to do this right now, and we have to do it in such a way that average people can look at their phone and they can understand whether or not they can trust that call that's coming in. And so RCD gives us a vehicle to deliver this additional enhanced information to the end user. And it's not just additional information, which is great for the end user because now they can look at their phone and they can say that this is a brand that they recognize. I've never seen a call delivered with this logo before. This looks trustworthy. I'm going to answer this call. And that's really what we're trying to evoke. But the awesome thing about this is that under the hood, it's cryptographically secure and verifiable end to end on the call. And that gives us the ability to deliver that information in a trustworthy way where end users can look at it and know, I can answer this call. It's just like when you go to a website like Amazon and you see the little check mark in the location bar and you don't even think twice about trusting the website anymore. And we need to elicit a similar kind of response and reaction to end users on voice calls as well.
Well, Brad, I want to thank you for joining us today and giving us this interesting insight on RCD and how it might now be creatively used. Where could we learn more about this topic and also Numeracle?
Well, we love talking about this technology and helping people find ways to restore trust in communications. To find out more, visit our website or join on our podcast. Find more information at numeracle.com.
Brad, again, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.